I have, for instance, looked at Elon Musk, and of course, we know what he has done when he took over Twitter and turned it into X. He fired all the people who were there and started to really promote his extreme right policies. We should not think that these kind of virtual identities with another username, etc., give us any protection. What we can say, however, is why should everyone have access to these social media?
So, hi Geert, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Let's imagine that someone just joined this podcast today and has never heard your name before. How would you introduce yourself to them, and why would it be worthy for them to listen to today's conversation?
My name is Geert Lovink. I'm a media theorist, activist, and internet critic. I'm based in Amsterdam, but I lived in many places around the world, in Budapest, but also in Budapest and Berlin and Australia. I'm running the Institute of Network Cultures, which is a small research center here at the Polytech, the Applied Science School. It's a big university, in fact, with 50,000 students in Amsterdam. And I've been doing that for the last 22 years. I've been active in this field since in the late 1980s. So, in terms of the internet, I'm definitely not the first generation, but I consider myself second generation, especially, of course, very much involved in the early phase when the internet became publicly available in the 1990s, which was all about public access, and then that leading up to a lot of virtual communities, and then of course the dot-com bubble and burst. And after that, I did my PhD and then started this center in Amsterdam.
So, you've been critical of the internet for like over 30 years. What initially drove you to become an internet critic?
Well, it was very obvious for us in my generation that the let's say the democratization of radio and television and print was going to be followed by a wave of digitization and multimedia, and that a lot more people would have access to all these tools and channels and platforms. So there was a very high, let's say, growth and growth potential. And so very soon after we realized this, it became clear that we should, in fact, compare the computer networks and the internet, with theater, literature, with film, and with many other cultural forms of expression. We do not say that a theater critic is critical of theater, right? No, the theater critic loves the theater, right? And writes with passion and is, of course, opinionated about a theater play. The same we say, about a literature critic or film critic. The film critic is not pessimistic about the medium of film, quite the opposite. And so, we started off with this, and we said, if this internet medium is going to be really big, then we also need the same kind of critics, people who very seriously think, professionally about the standards, especially the quality standards of all the means of expression that we find out there. Of course, it didn't turn out that way, right? Hungary doesn't have a single internet critic, right? You wouldn't be able to mention one. And the same, of course, counts with so many other countries and places. So this was, in that sense, a complete failed project. And of course, the commercialization is the main reason for that. The companies, of course, didn't like to have critics. Why would you support any of this? Education also didn't like it. Of course, you could raise technical people who have, knowledge about the technical standards, programmers, nerds, geeks, people who can maintain systems, but there's no place in this world for internet critics.
Ha komolyan érdekel a kriptokereskedés, érdemes megnézned a Krakent, a 2011 óta működő amerikai székhelyű kriptotőzsdét. Kiemelkedő előnye, hogy támogatja a Bitcoin Lightning Networköt, így gyorsan és olcsón tudsz BTC-t ki- és beutálni. A Krakenen egy helyen intézheted a kriptovásárlást, eladást, tartást, vagy beállíthatsz DCA-t is, vagyis rendszeres vásárlást is. A staking révén passzív jövedelmet szerezhetsz, illetve spot és margin, valamint derivatív piacokon is aktívan kereskedhetsz. Emellett a Kraken MiCA engedéllyel is rendelkezik, ami extra biztonságot és átláthatóságot nyújt a magyar felhasználónak. A podcast leírásában találod a partnerlinkünket. Ha ezen keresztül regisztrálsz, azzal hozzájárulsz a csatorna fenntartható működéséhez, plusz költség nélkül. So actually, as an internet critic, as a theater critic or a food critic, I would assume that you can make a difference between a good internet and a bad internet. Or what is
For sure.
in the sense good and bad? Can you tell us a little bit more about that as well?
Yeah. First of all, we see these things as quality standards. Again, we don't say it's good or bad. We don't use those terms per se. So it's not a moral judgment. What we want is, to further cultivate the medium, to give more voices room. Maybe we also want to take the medium very serious, which means that we have to think about how to create jobs, not only for those in marketing or those who maintain the technical infrastructure in the background. One of the main issues is, of course, that we take those who write for it and who create content for it should be seen as extremely important persons. Now, of course, over time, this eventually happened, right? So almost 20 years later, we were suddenly confronted with the birth of the so-called influencer, right? And so the influencer, hopefully, was going to be able to make a living from all the postings, etc., right? But very, very often the influencer, of course, did not earn the money from the medium itself, but earned money indirectly by promoting products or doing product placements or anything like that, right? So the influencer, in fact, became an integral part of the marketing machine that is happening everywhere, right? And so this was exactly not because people created content and were paid for it, right? They are still paid through other means, and which kind of is the point that I want to make here, that it is not the content that counts, but the marketing.
Yeah, but you can have ethical influencers and then non-ethical ones. So, for example, when I'm looking for a product, I always look for people who actually tested this product, and then if they had a good or bad experience with it. And you can, I think, if you have a bit of let's just say critical thinking in general, you can differentiate like someone who is genuinely liking something and someone who is just like paid to advertise these products.
Yeah, I hope so. And this is exactly the type of literacy that we want to spread, right? And so this is important. But yeah, these days, even with the rise of artificial intelligence, all this becomes more difficult to distinguish. How much of the content is still generated by humans, and how much is already generated by machines, right? This is becoming very unclear, and the borderlines are very blurry. And so, yeah, am I looking at a promotional image, or something that is genuinely tested? And yeah, I hope so, that the internet will become more controversial. That is in general, the aim, that we create places where more opinions, and more forces in society are coming together, and maybe even clash. And one of the problems is, of course, that the internet, as it is developed right now with platforms and social media, these things, they don't come together anymore, right? This has been already discussed and researched long time ago, the so-called echo chambers, that people, like-minded people, only discuss and meet other like-minded people. So this is an issue, and we haven't really been able to resolve this, unless you think that something like fake news and harmful content, etc., is going to do the job. Even though these things have been combated for the right reason, they have not really been able to bring opposite meanings and points of view together. Quite the opposite.
Actually, like to go back to the AI part, recently I had this conversation with a friend that he showed a video to his mom, who is in her 70s, and then he really took the time to educate his mom about like what is AI and how to differentiate like what is an AI content and what is not. And he showed a video of us participating in a podcast together, and then his mom was saying that, how do you know that this is not AI? Because of all the lights and everything that is going on, it's like very hard to sometimes make a difference. Is there any like practical tips that we can give to people, that like what they should look out for?
Well, it's an arms race. So these days, people will immediately dump this content in a place that will check if this is a genuine human, or if it's machine generated, right? So we ask machines to check this for us, which is strange and maybe even ironic, right? So yeah, we sometimes have to do this because the communication gets so sophisticated that even we experts who have been around for a really long time, have a hard time to make a proper assessment if this is a human or a machine. So that's probably not going to do the job. What is going to do the job, though, is that we concentrate more on strengthening, let's say, what Douglas Rushkoff called team human. He calls this team human. So there are machines, but we are playing in team human. And so in team human, we are dealing, like between you and me, we are in team human. And so to strengthen the ties between us is relatively easy to do. And it only starts to maybe become tricky when others from outside try to intervene, right, in what you and I and maybe a larger group of people that come together that work on a certain thing, right? And so the question really is, how do you cultivate, your social networks inside team human? And this is I would say is the big challenge in the years to come.
So, your latest book called Platform Brutality, which examines the violent truth of tech overlords and techno feudalism. Can you explain us, like, what does platform brutality mean in like practical terms for everyday users, and why is this moment different from earlier platform critiques?
Yeah, I didn't like the term at all in the beginning, and I was a bit surprised and maybe even shocked by my own thinking and by because when I wrote this book, I wasn't even ready for this, because it's not a very pleasant analysis, and it doesn't really give much space for hope. And so it's pretty, let's say, harsh. I'm not a pessimist because I'm an activist and I bring together a lot of people, and so I have a lot of energy, and so I want to do a lot of things, right? So I'm not so prone to pessimism in that sense, right? So I struggled against my own analysis, and this analysis goes like this: the expansion of the internet, which happened, let's say, roughly speaking, over the last 30 to 35 years, has more or less come to a halt. And all this kind of energy of getting to know more people, more networks, more likes, more connections, etc. Yeah, certainly in the last couple of years started instead of let's say an explosion, yeah, started to implode. Um, and this is very unpleasant for many people. Now, the most obvious sign for that you can see in uh, the really, really different strategies that come from Silicon Valley big tech companies, right? And so, in the last 1.5 or 2 years, roughly speaking, after Trump started, in his second term, we have seen that these companies are actually willing to actively start to act against the objective interests of their own users and customers, namely us. Now, how is that? Because that's so strange. Like, okay, if you have 1.5 billion users, which for Silicon Valley is a normal average, why would you harass them? Why would you start to openly say, yes, we are surveilling you? Yes, we will report you to authorities. Yes, we will crack down on your opinions and so on. Right? This has never happened before. because they were always liberal and they said no, the internet is different, and let's let it just grow, and it will all be fine, right? So that was kind of surprising to me. One of the companies, of course, that embodies all this is the surveillance company Palantir. That has an explicit aim to surveil us, and also to repress us if it's necessary, right? So this is not just let's say indirect, looking a little bit from the different points of view, so that you feel like, okay, maybe I'm a little bit watched now, but I can still do and say what I want. No. Yeah? Right. So there's a really different approach. Now, in my book, and also after that, I have, for instance, looked at Elon Musk, and of course, we know what he has done when he took over Twitter and turned it into X. Right? He fired all the people who were there, and so on, and started to really promote, his extreme right policies, directly top down as the owner, to literally hundreds of millions of people directly. Okay. But what is more important, and even more telling as an example, is what he then did using the same techniques in early mid 25 last year, with Doge. And with Doge, for instance, he fired almost immediately 300,000 people. Now, and in my book and later on, I've tried to develop this whole idea. What does it mean when these companies, instead of facilitating connectivity, start to actively use the cultural technique of deletion? What does it mean to delete? Right? And this is funny enough, this is a new question, because deleting, it seems almost harmful. Everyone, is sometimes deleting something on their devices, or nothing. Maybe you use it to optimize your system a little bit when your computer or when your phone is full or slow. All right. So what's wrong with what's wrong with deletion? I never, seriously studied it in all these decades, right? I never spent much time, and that is in itself is telling, right? We don't know, but so Musk has said, in order, to really act in this world, of course, helped by Trump and Milei and Orban and all the rest, right? We need to actively delete the other. We need to get rid of them. Right? And this is then becoming, let's say, what I call in the book, an example of structural violence. This is a term from the 1970s, which sometimes is also called abstract violence, right? And so there we see that systems and infrastructures can utilize this, but we know over time that this symbolic violence will ultimately also result in real violence, right? So the real violence of, let's say, against physical bodies, or real, so-called real existence, this is fluid, but it always starts with being excluded, being not able to access the system anymore. When you wake up next day, everything is gone. You can't enter it, and this is what happens now to millions of people.
I mean, okay, on one hand, I agree that everyone should say and be able to say whatever they want to. Before Musk and the radical right, there was like a radical left pole on this side, I think, or on this spectrum. Because, for example, like before, you couldn't really like express anything that was against, for example, like the woke culture, because then you would be cancelled. And I also don't agree with cancel culture in general. I mean, you should be able to say
Yeah.
whatever you say, or whatever
Mhm.
you want to say. It's either left or right. It doesn't really matter. And yeah, it's kind of hard now that you, by like being
Yeah, in the book,
wrong.
I definitely go into this, and also in my last book, Stuck on the Platform, I have an entire chapter, on this cancel culture. And so for me, I take that serious, and I have studied that extensively, and I've also written about that. However, I want to make a distinction between, let's say, the cancel culture that you are talking about, which of course was still quite strong, let's say 5 years ago, especially during COVID. And these structural forms of violence, because the woke culture was never in charge, right? So it had to focus on individual cases, and it had to more or less symbolically, in a certain context or community, had to single out a person or a small group, right, and had to then cancel them. But this had no structural meaning. So this was all done on the basis of morals, on the basis, of course, of ideology, woke ideology, but it had no structural power, if you like, right?
Mm.
So it was all about, let's say, mentality, or even fashion for that matter, or kind of a claim that groups were having some moral authority, or hegemony for that matter. Even though I doubt that they really had one, um, but this was primarily happening inside communities and contexts, right? The mass deletion that I'm talking about now is on a way larger scale, and is no longer about ideology or about disagreement, right? And it's about exclusion. So and structural exclusion. And so this is very yeah, it's a different scale, but no doubt, with the same roots. So that's why I appreciate your question.
Just one more thing that I'm very curious about, because we talked about being pro-human, and then platforms and the online communication usually like lets us dehumanize, or lets us like detach from reality. For example, like on the internet, I could be anyone. Like I could hide behind the
Mhm.
mask and I could comment
Yeah.
anything. But like if I was in a friend group and I commented the same harmful things that I do on the
Mhm.
internet, I would get slapped in the face. So do you think
Yeah.
this dehumanization is why we are like feeling so freely expressing ourselves on the internet, because we have no consequences, or like we are not
Well,
making
it,
like
it has consequences in your circle of friends. People often think that, especially if they create, let's say, a second identity, or parallel virtual identity, that it has less or no consequences. But this is, of course, not the case. Unfortunately, of course, there are so many tools, especially for these companies, but also for the state, for secret services, to ultimately, find out who you are, right? So this means that, in fact, the play that we play out, yeah, is yeah, I see it much more as a play, and I would definitely warn everyone, if they think they can hide, to think twice, because even I, have the technical tools, and they're very easy to get, to find out who you are in real life. So, so yeah, so we should not think that these kind of virtual identities with another username, etc., etc., give us any protection.
Hmm. So let's go back to the book a little bit. So you argue that the platform dependency has become um, something that like real people can't afford to leave. For example, Instagram, TikTok, X, or Facebook. Is exodus from these platforms still possible, or are we permanently like stuck on the platforms?
At the moment, it seems like we're stuck with no end inside. My center has been advocating for the exodus for 15 years. Back in 2011, we started Unlike Us, which was a big campaign to combine, let's say, the critique of social media, at the time very much focused on data and privacy violations, um, and the need for alternative social networks. Okay. So 15 years ago, we kind of, there were no social media, right? And so they were only in the very beginning, and we had in that period just come out of this reconstruction period after the dot-com crash, which is called Web 2.0. And this period was dominated by forum software, by and in particular blogs, right? And so, in that time, we slowly see that the certain social networks start growing and start to become dominant. At first, of course, Facebook, and then later on, all the others you mentioned. By the way, in that list, we always see mentioned that, funny enough, YouTube is also always listed as a social network, right? This is very interesting because YouTube worldwide, at least until quite recently, was one of the largest communities, with a lot of users interacting with each other, discussing the video content, and so on, right? So, and just in terms of the sheer numbers of people that are using it and are active on YouTube, this was still considered, a social medium, which interesting in itself. So yeah, we couldn't go away. We got stuck, and 15 years later, there are now a lot of alternatives, right? So unlike maybe in the very beginning, but we're still not capable of mentally. Capable of leaving. So the dependencies are such that it is out of the question.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate because sometimes, for example, if we are taking like the small case of Hungary, here, if you want to find an event or a concert, they are usually not posting it on their website. They are posting it on Facebook. And if you don't have a Facebook account, then how are you going to find the
Yeah.
concert? So
Very good
it's like
example.
if it's not me, then one of my friends needs to be on Facebook, for example,
Yeah.
because otherwise we are like missing out and we are in a disadvantage
Yep.
compared to other people.
Yeah, that's a very good example of this growing dependency. And as long as these, let's say, cultural institutions, a theater, a concert hall, or a band, is not willing to provide these informations out on the public internet, this situation is not going to change, and that's why we are stuck.
And what do you think about like the decentralized versions of the social platforms? For example, now there is Primal, and I'm not sure which other
Yeah.
platforms. Maybe you can like tell us about it as well.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, don't underestimate the functionality has increased. So to portray them as primitive or that they don't work, that's just no longer the case, right? I mean that is not a serious critique. Then you basically have no idea what you're talking about. Yeah. So this is not the point. The point is not that they are too difficult to use or none of that. um, so the problem is elsewhere, and should be discussed as maybe cultural or psychological, mentally. We're talking about, let's say, user behavior of consumers, right? And so that is the level we are at. We're talking about, and I know this is a difficult thing for me, but my critique is often very close to the whole rhetoric around addiction, right? People are addicted. But I myself, I never use this term because I don't want you, for instance, Barbara, for instance, you, to portray you as a drug addict. This is not fair. This is not good, right? So and of course we can say, oh, we feel for Barbara because she's so dependent, and this is not the right way to go. Right, even though we can raise some sentiments and sympathy for Barbara, I don't want to go there, right? Yeah. So I do not want to portray the others, and millions if not billions of others, as addicts. Right. And so this is a bit of an issue, and we see that now coming back also with the unease people have, for instance, with this border of when is your childhood really ending? Is it 16, 15, 14? And why should children suddenly be excluded from these social media? We have a bit of a similar unease. We can say, okay, we want to give those children a harm-free and happy youth. We want them to grow up and just enjoy books and each other and go to the playground and so on. Right? All this sounds very beautiful and naive, and but the reality is of course very different, because these children are growing up in the middle of the 21st century, which is deeply, in information society, in which everything depends on digital communication and coordination, right? People have very busy lives, also parents. They need to coordinate their own lives, their families, their kids, and so on and so on. So very, very soon, this element of digital coordination or communication comes into play. And to presume that this is not happening. Now, what we can say, however, is why should everyone have access to these social media? And for me, that is a much more interesting question. How did it happen that social networking interaction, let's say between Geert and Barbara, got interfered by news channels? We were communicating, the two of you, or maybe even with 2, 3, 4 others. And suddenly, there's all sorts of news channels and advertisements and all sorts of other people. Yeah, this whole idea that the social needs to be constantly disrupted by others is not technical. It has nothing to do with technical. Also has nothing to do with freedom. Why is the fact that I am disrupted should be interrupted as freedom? It's not, right? The disruption is not a sign of freedom. It's a sign of poverty, and it undermines. For instance, in this case between you and me, it undermines, social interaction, and maybe even something that we are coordinating or trying to achieve together, resolve, whatever.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, it's an interesting case because, like, I want to bring it like back to my childhood as well. Because, for example, I grew up with internet. Like, I don't remember a time where there was no internet at home. I remember that the first game they let me play on the computer was Doom, and it was the second part, which is a very violent game. And I was like 6 years old. So,
Yeah.
um, and I was
Okay.
like one of the first to have a Nintendo, and then I had my VHS cassettes as well, and then my
Mhm.
DVDs. So I was like watching
Yeah.
watching cartoons and Disney movies and everything else. And my parents were busy, so like I wouldn't say that
Yeah.
like
And it's that last aspect that I want to emphasize. So we need to be very, very careful with their critique, not to keep out of sight that people have to coordinate their lives, which is increasingly difficult because incomes are going down. There's more housing crisis. There's more people are living further away. They have to travel longer hours, and so on and so on. And so there is more and more need for internal, let's say, communication and coordination, right? And so maybe also because of that, there's more time that needs to be killed, as it is called. So people experience that their time is very valuable, but when they look more carefully, they see that in fact they are spending more hours a day, for instance, traveling or doing nothing or waiting or whatever, right? And so this gap is growing between a life that is fulfilling and significant, with, on the other hand, a lot of empty time that needs to be killed with doom software, games, and
But
content.
do you think, do we need that? Because like back in the days, I remember when my parents dropped me off at my great grandma's for a
Mhm.
weekend, And then there was not much impulses. There was a very big garden, and then sometimes I would go up to her and then tell her I'm bored, and then she was like, "Okay, then go and figure something out." And then she said that it's very useful to be bored because that's when creativity kicks in. So now I still like sometimes I take a weekend or like a
Yeah,
week out of my year to just
sure.
be bored because it's
Yeah,
also like
no, of course. And this time, yeah, you can call it boring or you feel bored, but in fact, this is time also when you process experiences, right? And so, if you want to move on, and if you want to do other things and make next steps, you need this time of reflection, because the Silicon Valley companies, they want to occupy every single second, right? So every single empty time there is in which you can reflect, they are already offering some new content that you have to see, that you have to like, that you have to follow forward, or whatever you want to do with it, right? And so what it is, yeah. Sometimes I also call it, a conspiracy against collective reflection,
hmm, hmm. That's actually
and
very
not just
interesting
only,
because I
let's say, individual reflection, because obviously that is necessary. But
Tudtad, hogy a BitcoinBázisnak van egy saját webshopja is? Na ott tényleg minden megtalálható, ami egy bitcoinernek vagy kriptorajongónak kellhet. Hardware tárcák, könyvek, kiegészítők, meg persze néhány menü ajándék is. Nálunk nem csak forinttal, hanem bitcoinnal és altcoinokkal is fizethetsz teljesen biztonságosan. Ráadásul, ha bitcoinnal fizetsz, automatikusan 10% kedvezményt kapsz. Szóval, ha legközelebb hardware tárcát keresel, vagy meglepnél magad valami kriptós cuccal, nézd be a bitcoinbázis.hu/shop oldalra, mert így nem csak magadnak, hanem a podcastnak is segítesz.
Is there a difference? Okay, like it might be like a controversial question, I'm not sure, but is there a difference between men and women in social media usage, and then how it impacts their reflection on themselves?
I don't know enough about that. For sure, you can read about it. We stopped using all these channels, a really long time ago. I left Facebook in 2010 in the first, widely arranged opposition between against the privacy violation of Mark Zuckerberg. We were with 50,000 people, if I remember well, and left. And yeah, so this makes it sometimes a bit hard for us, for a small center, to answer, questions like this. But yeah, there are so many social scientists out there that do all these very precise statistical observations. You can just go to all the academic journals and read the articles there about it. We have moved on, and we would like to make a difference, and discuss very different forms of computer mediated communication, as it was
So,
called in the past.
so in Set by Design, you critiqued how technology transforms self into a sharing platform. So, how has social media's impact on mental health and identity worsened since that 2019 book, especially with TikTok's dominance? What do you think?
Yeah, luckily, I'm surrounded by a lot of young people, students, and yeah. Also, I have to say, I have a 24-year-old son, Casimir, and so he had a strong influence on me. I grew up with him, so yeah, to have this as a prime resource, gave me invaluable insights, even though I'm not active on these channels myself. Unfortunately, the drama, the mental health crisis is such that you don't have to be on these channels at all. The overflow, let's say, the impact of it is so visible, and that you don't have to necessarily collect the evidence of that on those channels themselves. Having said that, yeah, it is a little bit difficult to distinguish between, let's say, general mental health crisis, especially in Gen Z, and the ones that are specifically tech induced. Yeah. And I agree. So I agree. One of the problems there is that, for experts, this is very difficult to distinguish. And so there are many, many more reasons and phenomena, that contribute to this. Also, the socio-economic circumstances that young people find it harder and harder to find a job, to find independent housing, to leave, their parents and build up their own lives, let alone, start a family and so on and so on, right? So, so these are also very hard socio-economic factors that play a role. On top of that, they are then connected 24/7 to these channels that are highly personalized. So social media are still very, very much focused on you, right? And so we don't hear about that. I think in 10 years ago, for us, that was a really important insight that, these channels are something uniquely for you, right? And so you are addressed there in a very personal and intimate way. And this makes the dependency also harder. You're not just watching some abstract, impersonal state television channel or something like that. No, this is all information that comes to you because you have some kind of personal, emotional connection to all this information that starts to flow in your direction.
Hmm. That kind of like reminds me like how there was a study with rats and how they were like entertained to death, and this feels a little bit like that. How we are like being entertained to death, and we are not like it's not easy to connect with other people. But then
Mhm.
as soon as the rats were like put into like a good social environment, it was easy for them to connect and not like choose the poison. Okay, like it went a little
Yeah,
bit deep, sorry.
yeah, no. One of the things why I like what you said is that a lot of people, of course, have noticed that, especially Instagram and TikTok lately in the last couple of years, has more and more turned into a television channel because, they're swiping and all they see are these very short and entertaining video clips. And so this, in a way, becomes a televisual experience. And it is also noted, of course, that the social network side of it has degraded, and that it's no longer just about you responding or you being in contact on this platform with others, with dear ones or friends, whoever. The uninterrupted video experience has taken over. So in that sense, it's quite ironic that at the end of all these social media developments, we are back into a new form of the televisual, we are entertaining ourselves to death experience.
Yeah, it's I'm also I like TikTok. I know it's probably not healthy. I am not overusing it though, so like I feel I feel okay with that. I like my little algorithm, but at the same time, I just found a very interesting book that I'm listening to while I'm cooking or doing chores or like
Mhm.
walking around.
Yeah.
It's called Ayn Rand, like Atlas Shrugged, and it's
Mhm.
like for some reason, like when I'm listening to the book, I'm not even thinking about like TikTok, or it doesn't even come to my mind. So there is like days go by when I'm not even opening the app, and then it doesn't even occur to me because
Yeah, so the live streaming, the podcasts, but also what you just described, the audio book. They're all very powerful alternatives to the social media environment, and this is how we also can imagine that, especially young people will leave eventually, but the darker scenarios are quite different, and they are not about, let's say, more profound storytelling environments that give you so much more, but that the only way to really quit with all this is a much more dramatic one, and it's a third world war, a real catastrophe, something really dramatic, and I do not wish any of that to happen, right? But it seems like the acceleration of these systems are almost inevitably going in that the direction of the rise and fall of a social media empire with very destructive um, episodes to come.
hmm. So what is like the doom and gloom version, and then what is the pretty version then? So the doom and gloom is like world war, and
Yeah,
then
exactly. Yeah, it's of course an inevitable clash between America and China, playing out in Asia, not so much in Europe, of course. Europe, that was very much World War II, right? Huh? So it's not so much about us. Are we forced to take sides? Will we join this? Yeah. So these are the much larger forces at work. And as we know, in terms of internet users, most of them are in the wider Asian realm. We know that. You only have to look, yeah, for 1 second on, the distribution of the world population and the amount of internet users, right? And so, so these are wider, let's say, clashes that may come ahead, and which will inevitably render also all these social media extraction and the disruption machines completely useless, because we will have other things to think about, unfortunately, right? But I don't want this to happen. But the inner logic is clearly going pointing in that direction.
and what is like the pretty version? So what is like the positive outcome that we could hope for?
Yeah. Well, okay. Let's say at best this will be some form of European data sovereignty place in which the inevitable geopolitical breakup of the world leads to a Europe for instance, that is much more self-confident, that is organizing its own media architectures and form of communication, and that is no longer depending on these disintegrating American platforms.
So art has a special responsibility in this context, I think. So, like, what role should artists and cultural workers play in resisting platform brutality and like building alternatives?
Yeah, unfortunately, not much is happening in this field, I have to say. We can express some general desires, but the fact is, all artists are on Instagram. They have no idea how to escape it. And in that sense, they are not at all in an avant-garde in that sense, unfortunately, right? Now, the only thing is, you could say, maybe in a next generation, if not Gen Z, maybe Alpha, or even one after, will be able to stand up and revolt. Huh? And that could still very much still happen. Yeah? And in that process, art can play a very important role. In general, these days, of course, people would say, artists can still play a role in, let's say, AIs, or can they play a role, through NFTs, in revolutionizing, let's say, the payment systems, in the way we will reward artists for their work, and not force them to work for free, as always has been the strong belief system, and the strong belief of Silicon Valley, who look down on everyone who is creating content, because they are losers. So there's quite a lot to do for us to prepare for a new generation of artists that will come up, and that will be able to make a difference. But I'm optimistic there. But unfortunately, and this drives me nuts, this can even take another 15 years. And that's a long time, right? So why? Because the world is going very fast. The world is moving in real time. Everything is accelerating except the artists. So this is in itself, is an interesting observation that I have to deal with.
So, to wrap this episode up, like, what's one thing that our listeners can actually do tomorrow to resist platform control, even if they cannot leave social media entirely?
I think there's still a lot that can be done in terms of, deinstalling apps from the phone. Concentrating, let's say, vital communication in a few channels. So the ones, with your family, with your dear friends, etc. They don't need to be on social media. You can communicate with them easily outside. The whole idea that these social media have to integrate all aspects of life is something we should stop with, and should in fact despise. It's not necessary. And so so to dedicate certain things to different tools and apps can be a very valuable step one.
Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you think would be very useful for our listeners? and you would like to communicate towards them?
Well, try to organize your social life in a different way. Just start it, because it's easy to do, because maybe you're dealing with 5, 10, or 15 people. You can easily agree, especially if you are young, and you suddenly come up in a new social constellation. There's always the possibility to restart. And so I would say, maybe the old systems cannot be changed, but as Hannah Arendt always said, make new beginnings, and it's the new beginnings that will make the difference.
Yes, thank you so much for your time and all the valuable information that you shared with us today. And I would like to also thank you for being critical in a time where we actually need different opinions, and we need to be able to actually discover this. And without these voices, we would be probably a little bit lost doing so, or wouldn't actually, my generation wouldn't be
Well, I would say see you all soon in Budapest. So